Today we have some pretty big news for World of Tanks console, and we're jumping into the latest articles from Wargaming to give you the full news for tomorrow's update, which is the 25th of February. Yeah, it seems to be quite a while into the year already, but luckily we've already got ourselves a pretty decent sized update that is coming tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to jumping in, trying out these brand new tanks which will be coming in. They are, of course, the Chinese rocket boosted heavy tanks, so following on from the BZ 176 that was introduced with the latest season that we've recently got, we are going to in fact get the actual tech tree line which will come in, and this is some pretty decent stuff because obviously we don't get that many new tech tree lines, although they are available on the PC version of World of Tanks. These are coming to console, which is also great, but we'll delve into some of the statistics, and we've also got ourselves a Cold War Premium and Mercenary contract that you can also complete if you're a Cold War player, so that you've got something to at least focus on if you want to play and you don't feel like you've got a whole lot of Cold War content, or at least new tanks that you can do stuff with. At least you'll have a contract to be able to do. So jumping in to, of course, the Chinese rocket boosting heavies, they start from tier 7. So we start with the BZ58, the BZ166, the BZ68, and then up to the BZ75. They come off of the Type 58, so if you haven't already ground out quite a few of the Chinese tech tree lines, then you're probably going to want to be making your way to the Type 58, which shouldn't be too difficult to be able to get to. Luckily, this one starts relatively low, and so if you go and play the Type 58, you'll be able to get straight in with the actual new tech tree line when it does drop. I'm sure many of you already have this one, as it's, you know, needed to go towards some of the mediums or the heavy tank lines anyway. So this is a pretty decent one to at least start off with. Of course, we start with the BZ70 or 58, which is going to cost you 1.5 million silver and 141,000 XP. So quite a decent chunk of XP to be able to research a tier 7. Whether or not this incorporates the total cost of grinding out the Type 58 to the tank, it seems like a lot of XP just for a tier 7. But yeah, I mean, it's coming in. But in terms of whether this tank is any good, it really wasn't that great within the PC version. It's not like garbage, but when you consider that you have other tier 7 heavies like the Tiger, which have a incredible amount of DPM, this tank really does suffer in that department. And although the fully upgraded version is what we've got currently, as shown in the statistics, we don't have the statistics for all of the different variants of the tank as you go from stock to fully upgraded. This is the top pinnacle level of the tank. You do have 320 damage, 195 pen, which is actually not awful for a tier 7, but it isn't like insanely incredible or anything like that. But what is pretty good is the premium penetration, 240 millimeters with that 320 alpha. So you shouldn't really have any problems when it comes to dealing with the tier 9s that you'll be facing, so long as you have some premium rounds within your tank. You're certainly not going to have to run this full of premium, because in tier 7 games, 195 is more than enough to go through almost every single tank that you'll meet anyway, so really no issues in that department at all. So penetration is not going to be a limiting factor. You've got 10 degrees gun depression as well with this tank, and of course it does have the kind of autoloader in the rear recess of the turret, so unfortunately we're not going to actually get that on this game, which does kind of suck. But what you do have is a aim time and accuracy that is kind of the same as what you'd expect from all of these Chinese heavy rocket boosting tanks, which is subpar. It's pretty bad. 2.7 second aim time with 0.42 accuracy. That is on the low side, and even with some of the perks and bonuses that you're going to get from your crew and also the equipment that you're taking, you're probably still looking above 0.33 accuracy on this tank, maybe even 0.36, somewhere in that sort of region. You're not going to get it down massively to that point where it's going to be a laser at all, which is obviously going to negatively impact the tank compared to some of the other tier 7 heavies. But in terms of the armor model, this tank has a huge lower plate, which really has no armor either. When you look at the PC version, I'm sure we'll get a very similar version of this tank on console, because of the fact that on PC it's not considered overpowered. It isn't, you know, one of the top tier tanks at the tier, and so they're not going to do anything, I don't think, in terms of balancing this vehicle. And in fact, for the sake of it, I'll jump onto the actual PC version so we can have a look at the armor viewer, because Wargaming don't actually give us any values for this tank in the overview of this on the article. So jumping over to the actual tank on tanks.gg, we have this following armor model. So you can see it's relatively similar to what you'll see with the tank that we've got available. On the console version, you can see that there is that big lower plate, which is a weak point. And of course, we've got ourselves that upper plate. Armor model actually looks somewhat different when it comes to the console version. The lower plate is actually thicker on PC, and the upper plate is 17mm, so that may be reflected by what we're seeing here in the two different colors. So it looks like we have pretty much got the exact same vehicle as on PC, which means we can take a look at the actual armor values that this thing is going to give you. So if you're looking at it frontally, you can see that the turret is actually relatively strong when you're considering the same tank. Up against it has the cupolas that you can pen, but they're quite slim profile, which is good. But the problem is it has 220mm of flat turret armor when you consider left and right of the gun mantlet, which against the standard round penetration of this tank of 195, it's okay, but as soon as you start loading the premium rounds, this thing is absolute garbage, to be honest, and that lower plate is absolutely terrible, which makes it one of those things where it is just going to be a big ball of hit points for the enemy team to pen you through. And even when you're using the maximum of 10 degrees of gun depression with this tank, if we're looking at it here, the flat cheeks on the left and right of the mantlet are still the weak point, and you're going to be able to pen these with premium ammunition with pretty much every tier 7 in the game, provided you got like 225 pen or more. And that is probably the problem with this vehicle, is that the turret is just not angled left and right of the gun mantlet like you would see with some of the other vehicles in the game. Lower plate, obviously, if you expose that, it is just curtains for you, 95mm of penetration when you're on a ridge line, so over pushing over a ridge, this is going to be diabolical for you. Side armor profile is garbage as well, so you will never be bouncing off of the side. It also has no kind of, I guess, spaced armor on the sides either, so it's just purely the tracks available to be hit. And of course that's only going to block HE really. So yeah, even side scraping with this tank, if you over angle just even a minuscule amount, you'll see that you can get penned. So you're going to have to extremely angle this vehicle, and when you are side scraping out from a corner, once again you're going to have to expose the cheek closest to the building edge as you come around that corner, which people can pen quite easily. And of course you can see even when side scraping at the maximum angle, it's still not the best in terms of its armor. You can get penned in some really weird spots that you can see there, going up into the lower half of this kind of turret ring, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's really not looking great for the armor model of the tank, which is what I could have told you straight out the bat. But at the same time, you know, pretty much the same for every tier 7 heavy. However, you do sacrifice some of the speed that some of the other tier 7 heavies get. It's on the lower side when you're not using the rocket boosters, of which this tank does actually get, but it only gets 3 of them compared to the BZ176, which gets 4 of them. It is a tier higher, and typically the higher the tier of these rocket boosters, the more boosters you actually get to use in your game. Cooldown is 4 seconds, so once you've used one, which will accelerate you in the game past that 30 kilometers an hour, you'll be able to then go and march forward, and then of course you've got to wait 4 seconds before you can use the next one. So it would take you about 8 seconds to use all 3 of your boosters from the point at which the first booster ends. And then, of course, you've got a 10-second duration at which you'll have that increased speed. So it's really useful at the beginning of a game to commit to a flank early on and get in a free shot of damage against people who are going to be moving up, and you'll catch them in kind of a crossing position as they're moving into the position to fight you during the rest of the game. So it's kind of very good in the early game to get to that, hill position or whatever you're going to be fighting over before anyone else is going to be able to do that in a heavy tank. And so you can catch a lot of mediums, that sort of thing. HE penetration is actually not god awful. It's 50mm and it does 420 damage. So up against some of the lightly armored vehicles that you'll be meeting at tier 7 with the HE, you can actually pen people. So maybe taking 3-4 different rounds of HE within your games is going to be worth it. And in those tier 9 games, coming up against Waffle Panzer 4s, Borsigs in a tier 8 game, that sort of thing, those HE rounds are really going to be very, very nice, and they're going to boost up your DPM. And although we touched on DPM and said that it wasn't that great, you can see here the DPM of this tank is 1536, which is severely low, and it's really going to be the major negative with playing this tank in particular, because of the fact that you are just going to get out DPM by pretty much everything that you do meet at this tier, and your armor is not going to hold up. So the only real bonus that you really have over a lot of other heavy tanks that maybe have increased DPM is the fact that you have rocket boosters, and of which you only get 3 of them, and they're only really useful or most impactful at the beginning or when you're trying to run away. So the limited use of those in terms of its effectiveness is probably not worth the severe lack of armor that this tank is going to get, and also the damage output that you're going to have as a negative alongside the accuracy negatives of playing these tanks. So that's kind of my overview of this tank. It looks like it's going to be a average to below average heavy tank for a tier 7. So I don't think there's anything to really write home about, other than the fact that, I mean, it looks much better than a lot of the other tier 7s in terms of the appearance of it, at least in my opinion. But then, yeah, if it's not actually performing in game, you might be a little bit more sour towards the tank. Then moving on, we have the BZ166 costing 187,000 XP to be able to unlock in 2.65 million silver. And of course that leads on from the BZ58. So once you've got that all the way through, you will then get this tank, which kind of looks like a combination of a T10 and some form of, I guess the 113-ish, the Chinese heavy tanks that we already have in the game, and maybe even like an IS-4, like the actual hull shape is a bit strange, where it's got this kind of, what do you call it, like a terraced layer of armor on the front of the tank. We'll jump on over to the armor model to kind of discuss whether the armor model is actually any good, whether you're going to bounce rounds in this thing, and then I'll join you back in a second. So jumping on over to the armor model of the BZ166, this is what it looks like visually. Obviously pretty much the exact same as on the console version. This is probably low res compared to the console, but in terms of its armor, when you look at it from the front, you've once again got that lower plate that the previous vehicle had, the BZ58, but this tank has a much smaller lower plate compared to that other tier 7. However, it does get a much bigger cupola comparatively, and so that is going to be a weak point of this tank. And similarly, you actually remove those kind of flat cheeks to the left and right of this tank, and that gives it a much better effective armor on the turret, making it a much stronger turret and much more usable when you are fighting people on ridge lines. However, once again, with the 10 degrees of gun depression, you'll see that just to the left and to the right of the vehicle on the bottom half, where it kind of swoops inwards, that is going to be the main issue with the tank. So you see right here, there's kind of a flat plate just here, and a flat plate just on the other side over here. So when we swap to the live model, you'll see that area right there, that is going to be your weak point when using the full amount of gun depression. However, when you're on flat ground, it actually is not a weak point because you're going to ricochet and the angle of it is much, much better. So even though you can use this tank hold down, it's going to be quite a small shot to be able to actually reliably go through, and it's probably only really going to be a weak point in those brawling situations, as when you're much further away trying to hit a shot like this. It's going to be quite a lucky shot if they do manage to hit you, and probably one that I'd be willing to risk if someone is quite far away, to reliably hit into those points right there without it hitting the top of your turret or even the upper plate and that sort of stuff. However, maybe they do ricochet off the upper plate into that, which is a potential thing. So yeah, either way, the armor is much, much better on this tank. However, it does have those key weak points, which are that cupola, that lower plate, and of course when you hold down those cheeks, underside of the cheeks of the tank as well. In terms of side scraping, this tank actually has that negative that you see with something like a few of the Soviet vehicles like the IS-3, where it has that kind of angled side skirt of the front, which is a weak point on this tank, and in fact pretty garbage. So side scraping with the tank is probably not going to work all too well. You can see it's only 100mm thick, and if we jump back to this, you'll see it's this area right here, this kind of chunk on the side. It's not very well easily defined on the console version of the armor, but that is where it is actually at. And so that is going to be a issue with the tank as well. And then, of course, the side armor is garbage once again, so you're not bouncing anything from the side unless you get super lucky. So, yeah, that is definitely an issue. And then the rear of the tank, yeah, you're going to get penned by HE from quite a lot of the bigger guns in the game. So avoid giving your backside to anyone if possible. Of course, if people are looking down onto the tank from above, it actually has this weird kind of that terrace area is actually a bit of a weird one, because there are areas where it's going to ricochet, so that's the vertical section of those terraces when you're looking down onto it, and so that can cause bounces, but equally there's also lots of areas where it could, so it's a bit of a hit and miss when shooting down onto these with another vehicle, but if they get significantly high above your tank, they are going to pen you everywhere, so just be aware of that. In terms of the stats of this tank, we have got them available to us, and once again, it is featuring a very, very lackluster DPM, 1625. It's a main feature of all of these tanks, pretty much, and that is really going to be a core issue with playing this tank and the tier 7 as well. It has a top speed of 30 kilometers an hour, so similar to what we saw previously. Power to weight ratio of 14.5 isn't actually bad for a heavy vehicle, so it's not going to take an absolute year to get up to top speed, but it isn't brilliant. It's kind of that mid-range. Aim time is 3 seconds, accuracy is 0.44, so you get significantly worse accuracy than some of the other tier 8 heavies that you'll see. And compared to the BZ176, I just feel like you're losing a lot, and you're not even getting that fun factor, which is the high alpha damage, as much as the BZ176 gets, which is of course the premium version of the Chinese heavy tank at tier 8. So this is the tech tree version. View range 350, not particularly amazing, and so you're gonna, it's gonna get boosted up quite a lot with some of the perks, equipment, and that sort of stuff that you can put on your tank. So you shouldn't have any issues with view range, but you are gonna have to put them on to make it competitive enough to spot people from distance. And then, your penetration, once again, not an issue with this tank. 221 with the standard, 270 with the premium, because if they had bad penetration, this tank would be absolutely garbage. You want to at least have a very good chance of penning things because of the fact that you have such terrible DPM. And of course, 270 pen on a tier 8 is amazing. You're going to go through pretty much everything that you meet, even tier 10s, quite reliably as well. So yeah, no issues with the penetration on this tank. But the shell speed is quite slow, so that's something I didn't mention about the BZ58 either, is that the shell speed is pretty low. So 1000 with the AP, 850 with the heat. The BZ58 does in fact get AP CR rounds, so that definitely gives it an advantage. So 990, but it's still slower than the AP rounds of the tier 8. So it swings and roundabouts. Either way, this tank is not going to have the best amount of speed to its rounds, so shooting at long distance targets, just going to be a pain. 420 alpha is okay. This tank gets 4 rocket boosters, as with the BZ176. with a 4-second cooldown on those and 10-second duration. So same as the tier 7. Overall, tank is definitely going to feel a little bit better than the tier 7. However, of course, there are significant disadvantages, such as the DPM, that I think is just going to make this tank, once again, a pretty average tier 8 to, you know, I think it's more average than it is, like, terrible or far below average, but it is not going to be great because of that DPM. I think that is really going to significantly impact the enjoyment that you can have with some of these in terms of, you know, being a real brawler. And then we move on to the BZ68, which is the tier 9. This one, 252,000 XP, 3.7 million silver to be able to unlock this one. And this one does get a fully upgraded version. So once again, it is the fully upgraded one that we're looking at. This gets 530 damage. So we'll start off with the damage. It gets 8 degrees of gun depression versus the 10 that you got with the previous. This one gets significantly more DPM than the tier 8. However, it's still only 2,000, and you're probably looking at around 2,800 as your maximum possible damage per minute, with all of the perks and equipment that are going to be able to boost up your DPM. So that is at like peak efficiency, maximum amount of DPM, which is considerably lower than some of the other heavies, but it is not as far of a disparity, I don't think. But yeah, it's far more manageable, shall we say, with this tank. The penetration, as we said with the previous, is very, very competitive. 248 with the standard, 315 with the premium rounds, which makes this tank incredibly useful for just punching through everything that you're going to meet. So it does indeed get heat rounds. AP as standard, they're pretty slow, 1050 meters a second with the AP and 930 with the heat. HE on this tank, 65 penetration with 660 alpha. That's definitely going to be usable against a lot more vehicles, and certainly against lower tier mediums and the lower tier and same tier light tanks. Going to be perfectly fine to go through those and get that extra bit of DPM. This one gets 5 rocket boosters, so definitely going to be using minimum of about 2 rocket boosters to get into position at the beginning of the game. Probably going to use it maybe 3 times getting into position, and then you've got a couple of boosters to then leave, or say you've won a flank, you want to push forward quickly to get to some more damage. You're going to be able to do that with this tank, which helps with that DPM deficiency that you do have over some of the other tanks, since you'll be able to get to another position faster than them at certain points in the game. But it is only 30 kilometers an hour base top speed without the rocket booster. Of course, once you activate it, it can go up to like 50. So yeah, it's pretty interesting mechanic, and definitely one that's kind of a bit more nuanced, and you'll learn how to use it as you go through the tiers anyway, to maximize how much damage you're dealing and how to get away from fights and stuff. Aim time 3 seconds, pretty poor. Accuracy 0.42 is, yeah, pretty bad for both of these. But, you know, other heavy tanks have similar sort of stats, but at the same time, yeah, it is not great to have with all of the other characteristics that are kind of negative with a tank like this. 380 view range, pretty darn good, and you're going to be able to boost that even higher, probably up to like 480, something like that, with the premium consumables and everything that we get to boost up view range in console, and I think it's going to be much more manageable. But jumping over to what the armor values are with this tank, let's jump over back to tanks.gg. So as you can see, this is the tank, and if we jump into the live model, you will see that it does get pretty strong turret armor, 300 plus pretty much everywhere on the turret, and the cupola has got smaller again, so this is a much smaller cupola, and when you're using your gun depression, you're pretty much never going to be able to hit it. However, you do get a weird kind of arc on the gun depression, where it does only go for 4.5 over the corners of the front of the tank. So yeah, that can be an issue with regards to using the full amount of gun depression everywhere. But once you get past those corners, it will actually go back down again, so you'll have maximum gun depression, and then you don't get well, you have 0 over the back of the tank. So yeah, that can be definitely an issue when trying to maybe reverse side scrape. It's not going to work, and you got this flat plate over here, which is going to be penned if you're trying to reverse side scrape, so definitely do not do that with these tanks at all. And then of course it gets a much bigger lower plate again, like the tier 7 did, and kind of rescinds all of the progress that was made on the tier 8 with regards to the size of the lower plate, which is once again a bit annoying when you're trying to use this effectively. And because it's fairly low profile, there's going to be quite a few tanks that are taller than you, at which point they'll be able to go through the upper plate of this tank. And certainly with heat ammunition, that is just, yeah, it's just not going to be good for you. Especially considering this is the high penetration heat. Even the turret can become a potential spot at which things like Jaegerus are going to go straight through. So in terms of those high penetration tank destroyers, your turret is actually potential to be hit through and just annihilated. So just be careful about that. When you are using your full amount of gun depression against, once again, high alpha and high penetration TDs, you do have those weak points on the left and right hand side, but they're far less prominent and they're actually very thick anyway. So that really doesn't become an issue with this tank, to be honest, and probably a very, very minor issue when looking at the tank. Once again, side scraping, it has those flat plates on the front, which are pretty darn weak. You're looking at about, when you're peak armor angling, about 200 millimeters, and you'll see that actually the lower portion of this tank only has 40 millimeters of armor, which means when you are side scraping out, you'll see that you can actually pen the lower half of the tank, provided that overmatching still exists in console. And as we said before in a few videos, that it doesn't seem like it actually does, but yeah, that can be an issue. And then you do have a pretty weak side, as with all of the previous tanks, and a very weak rear as well to this vehicle. So overall armor definitely works a little bit better in terms of when you're on a ridgeline, and probably what you'd expect from this sort of tank on a ridgeline comparatively to the tier 7 and 8. So looking pretty good in that department. So yeah, overall it's a much better tank than the tier 8 and the tier 7, and probably where the tech tree line starts to become a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, when you do play them. And then we jump into the tier 10, so you're going to need 368,300 XP, so a lot of XP ground out on that tier 9, which is just as well because it looks like the better of the 3 that we've looked at so far. And then of course, yeah, this is going to be your standard pricing for the actual tank itself, 6.1 million silver. This tank has the same top speed limit of 30. I would have liked to see this go up to 35 for the tier 10, but the power to weight ratio goes down at 12.66, making it fairly sluggish. I forgot to mention that the turret and hull traverse of these tanks is pretty darn slow, so they feel quite clunky when you're trying to turn with the tanks, and especially if you're trying to turn with the rocket boosters active, that is just a no-go. But this tank once again gets a slight improvement to its DPM, but yeah, the main factor about this tank over the others is that it gets 650 alpha with 258 pen, 319 pen on its premium, which is heat, with 650 alpha, and then 90 millimeters of penetration with its HE with 840 alpha, and that HE is actually very usable. It's usable against a lot of mediums that you'll fight, and also of course all of those light tanks and lightly armored tank destroyers. So yeah, the HE definitely worth carrying 5, maybe even 6 rounds of HE in this tank. I don't know if they give us the ammo capacity of this tank on console in this stat page. It doesn't look like it, but yeah, that would have been a nice thing to add in. This tank gets 390 view range, which is okay, and then it gets 6 rocket boosters with a 4-second cooldown, 10-second duration, which is very nice indeed. The tank gets 8 degrees of gun depression with 20 degrees of elevation, and yeah, overall it's kind of like an upgrade on the tier 9, with that alpha damage upgrade being the main impact, of course, with the tank. And the armor model. And so talking about the armor model, let's jump over there, see what it's actually cooking up, and I'll be back in a second. So jumping on over to the armor model of this tank then. This one does indeed start featuring a pike nose upper hull of the tank, which is a bit more different to the previous, rather than having that side plate which is kind of on the corner of the tank. This whole upper portion of the hull is more of a pike nose, and then it gets a traditionally very flat lower plate that is rectangular. So if we go to the live armor viewer, you'll see that in a bit more detail, where you've got this portion up here, which is very thick, 300 millimeters to be precise, which is very nice because of the effective armor angling of the tank, which works quite well. And you've also got a high ricochet chance on everywhere, even when they're looking from above you. So you can see here, very good angles on this frontal hull armor of the tank. It also gets a pretty strong turret, 360mm of pen on to be able to go through, which is very rare on any tank. And it has these very well angled side profile areas right here, which you can kind of see that's angled in two directions. So when you're frontally looking at something, it's quite difficult to actually pen things. But it does get three kind of distinct areas which you can pen on the very top of the tank. So the top of the tank is where you're going to want to go. And because they're frontally mounted plates and cupolas, that is going to be a bit of a problem when you try to use the gun depression of the tank, which is 8 degrees. It doesn't get any funky gun depression rules other than over the back, which is 0 degrees. But you can see even when you are using your gun depression, it doesn't hide the cupola because it's not rear mounted cupola. So that is an issue when you do kind of crest ridge lines with this tank, and kind of remove some of the fortification that some of the other, like the tier 9 actually has, where you can barely see a cupola at all when it's using its gun depression. So that is definitely an issue with this tank in particular. And of course, if you overpeak your lower hull armor, that is going to be a pain because they are going through you every single day of the week. And even when you're out in the open, it's gigantic lower plate, which is just completely flat. That is going to be the key weak point of the tank frontally, and those cupolas. So nothing really to be said with regard to anything else. If it overcrests over a ridge and you're very close, you can shoot up into these left and right hand sides like the previous. But of course, you'll have to see the tank fully over peak over a ridgeline. You've got to have a pretty steep angle to even go into here. This is probably like 30-degree angle looking at the tank from below. So yeah, really not the place that you're probably going to be wanting to hit, considering if it's like this and you can actually get a shot in here, you'll probably see the lower plate anyway. So you should just go for that if you do see this tank over peaking like that. Side, in terms of side scraping, much better. You can indeed side scrape with this tank, which is very different to all of the previous. But of course, as you go around the corner, they're going to be pre-aiming that cupola of yours, which is once again going to be shown first as you come around the corner before you can even fire at them. So that is going to be where they're going to aim predominantly if you are side scraping out. And if they have a very keen eye, you'll see that the engine deck of this thing is actually raised up. So you see this purple bar, that's the raise. And so when you see it from the front, you can actually pen the rear of the vehicle. It's a pretty strange weak point to actually go for, but it is effective and it can be used, and it's very, very thin. So it's something, if you are a lower tier vehicle, that you can aim for to pen this thing even from the front. If they do expose, further over to the corner, if they're angling towards you, that can be a weak point. But of course, that all depends on the situation that you're in. Side of the tank is pretty garbage. In fact, it's very bad on the hull armor. So always go for the hull. It's no real kind of weird angly or spaced areas, except from just above the track. But you'll see that in the visual model. So you see this area, this flat bar, that's spaced armor. So that can absorb some shells. But predominantly the whole area other than the tracks is just free real estate for you to land in quite a few shots, and the side of the turret's garbage as well, and then the rear of the tank's garbage as well. So yeah, very nice to be able to farm in the side and the rear, but yeah, pretty darn strong from the front, except from those cupolas and that lower plate. But that's pretty much the same for any tier 10 heavy tank, bar a couple. But with that being said, that is kind of the tech tree vehicles that are coming to console, what you can expect from them, and of course the key aspect of the tanks being those rocket boosters, which are definitely interesting. I like the new mechanics, but I certainly don't think that these are going to really rock the boat. It's not going to rock the balance of World War II, I don't think, like some of the premiums have in the past. And I think it's a pretty good mix of tanks. Some not so good, some better, and some with a unique playstyle that I think are going to be pretty good for World of Tanks console. I'm looking forward to jumping in, playing these for myself. So I actually think, credit where credit's due, I think these tanks are actually going to be relatively balanced, and they are kind of like that on PC. So yeah, nothing to really write home about in that department, and I'm not going to be complaining about seeing these in the matchmaker, unlike some of the other tanks that we've seen, at least within the last 6 months to a year. But with that being said, there is one more thing that we need to take a look at, which is the Cold War Premium and Mercenary contracts that we're going to be having available to us, which is the Leopard VT2, the Chisel, and the Smoothman, which will all be coming back into the game as contracts. So starting on February 25th, we will have available the Leopard VT2, the Smoothman, and the Chisel contract to complete. The contract for the Leopard VT2 is from the 25th of February to the 6th of May, so you've got quite a while to be able to grind this out. In fact, nearly 3 months, 2.5 months, something like that. So pretty darn good in that region. If you've already got the Leopard VT2, you'll receive its value in silver, so 5 million silver, which is nice, I guess, if you want to earn a bit more silver. But the actual stages, there's 8 stages that you can complete. Definitely do not buy out any of the stages. They are ridiculously priced, 12,800 gold just for one stage at the end. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. Overall, it's going to cost you like 20,000 gold or something to buy it out from stage 6 onwards. So yeah, would not recommend ever doing that. Ever, really, in my opinion. Stage 1, you can see it's just winning a battle and earning some XP. You'll get some medkits, repair kits, all of the standard stuff that you get from the stages of these contracts. Then you got win 2 battles, placing top 5 XP earners, and earning XP for some more medkits and repair kits, etc. Stage 3, you've got yourself detecting 1 or more vehicle, shouldn't be difficult, and destroying 1 or more vehicle in 2 battles, and then destroy 5 or more vehicles in any number of battles. You'll get that done probably in the region of completing the XP requirement of 9.6 thousand, some medkits, repair kit, a silver booster, and 5.2k silver. Then we got stage 4, which is assist with spotting damage totaling at least 2.8k, destroy 2 or more light tanks or medium tanks in any number of battles, and 20,400 XP. Of course, remember that these are all playing in light tanks or mediums unless I state otherwise, so they're only available to lights or mediums to be able to do that. And it's available to tier 10 only in World War II mode, and available to all eras of Cold War, so you won't be able to play anything but tier 10 pretty much in World War II if you want to get this contract completed. And then we move on to stage 5, at which point it is no longer available to play World War II mode, so forcing you to play Cold War. This is an issue that I hate, and I don't like the fact that you would have to play the Cold War mode in order to get this contract done. I understand that, you know, it kind of makes sense that the Cold War tank, you should play Cold War, but at the same time, you know, maybe some people just don't want to play Cold War at that point. Maybe they're trying to grind out some tech trees in World War II, forcing players to play a mode that maybe they don't want to play, but they still want to play the mode that the tank is in. You know, it's counterintuitive. They're just wanting to play the game how they want to play it. So limiting which mode that you're going to be in, big no-no for me. Just make the contracts more interesting if you're going to try and do something that is going to put more restrictions and make it more difficult, or maybe, you know, that sort of thing, rather than forcing players to play one particular mode. Because, you know, a lot of Cold War players still play World War II and vice versa. So yeah, I hate the fact that they limit them to one mode. And even the fact that they're limiting it to tier 10 only. I think tier 8 and above is more than satisfactory for pretty much this sort of contract, because anyone has access to World War II anyway, so the fact that they're still playing your game, either way, you guys get my opinion on that. You might have a completely different opinion. Maybe you think it's only right that the Cold War mode should be the one. But you can see Cold War mode, you have to play the top tier in post-war era 1 and above. So putting more restrictions. I feel like the more restrictions you put on it, the more you're going to find that these contracts impact the actual kind of enjoyment of a lot of players who are grinding out these contracts, and probably going to lead to a really horrible thing with Matchmaker, where people are just, World War II players who maybe haven't ground out that many Cold War tanks are then going to jump into, some of the balanced premiums that we've seen released in Cold War, if you catch my drift, and the matchmaker's only going to get worse, which it's already terrible if you're playing Era 2 and above in Cold War, but you guys know pretty much what that's like if you've been playing World of Tanks in Cold War for a while, especially over the last year. It's got dramatically worse in Era 2, and it's been pretty bad in Era 3 as well. But this one, deal 39,500 or more damage in any number of battles, and assist with spotting damage totaling at least 1 times your maximum health and earning 44,400 XP. Enhanced medkit, so premium consumables, basically 1 of each, and then 1.5 times silver booster, 2 times vehicle XP booster, and 28.8 thousand silver you'll also get. Then stage 6, you will have to play top tier in post-war era 1 and above, playing light tanks or mediums again, destroy 65 or more vehicles in any number of battles, and get 96,000 or more XP. You could have an issue with the destroying vehicles before you reach the XP, so you might actually not be able to destroy 65 before you get 96,000 XP, so that could actually limit you in this one. 3 days of premium account, 2 enhanced medkits, repair kits, and fire suppressors, and then 678,000 silver. Stage 7, you got 2.3 million silver, destroying 140 more vehicles, assist with spotting damage, total at least 29,200, and earning 208.8 thousand or more XP. And then you've got stage 8, which is just earning 459,600 XP for the actual tank itself and a vehicle slot, which you will have to play stage 7 and 8 in the top tier of escalation era 2 and above. So once again, we have seen issues with contracts, and once again, Wargaming continue to put these stringent things on the eras and tiers and the actual tanks that you have to play on these vehicles. So you know where the most overpowered tanks typically are lying within Cold War, which is the light tanks that are just outrageously crazy, like the new Weasel, the Weasel Mark II, or the Mark 1, I can't remember what it's called. Either way, the Weasel Era 2 is just an absolute broken monstrosity. So once again, putting in these restrictions, I just don't like to see it within the game. It typically leads to issues. We saw it a while back with the Spatuk, or the Czechoslovakian tier 8 premium tank destroyer, where it was a contract and it required people to play tank destroyers, and so all you had for literally like an entire month were Jaegeroos, Waffles, FV4005s, all of your top tier tank destroyers that were just outrageously high alpha damage, Tyrans, all of this sort of stuff, where it made it very, very, very annoying to play anything that wasn't just a tank destroyer with high alpha or anything with high alpha, because of the fact that if you tried to play a light tank, you basically got 1 shot or at least 2 shot. Same with a medium tank, you're getting 2 shot. Heavy tanks were just getting penned straight through all of their heaviest parts of their armor by heat rounds from Jaegeroos and all of the tank destroyers with high alpha and pen. And so yeah, it really does impact the matchmaker, and I can see it going the exact same way within Era 2. So these contracts, although it's fantastic that you can get a free tank, I'm not going to complain about getting a free vehicle, and certainly you guys are going to be even more ecstatic about getting these vehicles as well, because I already have the Leopard VT2. But if you are grinding the tech trees, if you're trying to play the game just how you want to play it, unfortunately these sorts of contracts really do impact the player base and the tanks that people are playing, and that should not be, in my opinion, a way to make these challenges interesting or more complex. And in fact, just adding in better goals that are just more interesting, like setting 20 people on fire. They're always the same boring ass contracts every single time, and I can tell you for a fact that it's going to be the exact same when we have a look at the Chisel contract and the Smoothman contract, just in varying degrees on how much XP that you require. So that sort of thing really sucks, and it doesn't even make for interesting, combat that you have to try different things and learn the game. It's just play, 700, 800 games during the period of time to be able to complete these for the average player, because this in total is going to cost you like 750,000 XP, like 800,000, like probably in the region of about 850,000 XP, which for the average player is going to take about 800 games, something like that, to be able to get the Leopard VT2. And considering that you can probably play about 6 games an hour, that's a lot of hours. You're talking, 100 hours plus for a player to be able to get this. And if you weigh down the cost that you're going to actually, if you were to take your time versus the 100 hours that you're going to have to play to be able to get the tank, the actual cost of you just buying the tank outright and playing however you want to play in the game is probably going to be like 20p an hour or something like that. So, it's probably just better that you save your time, play how you want to do, and just pay to have a tank like that. But I don't think that you should ever have to be forced into doing that, and these should be fun things that you go towards in the game, not forcing you down these routes and avenues that maybe you don't want to do and impacting your general play. And just even if you don't want to do any of it, you're just being impacted by someone else's contract where they're doing these light tanks or mediums and not available in World War II. So yeah, now what I can see, Era 2 and above is just going to be pain for anyone over the next course of a couple months, at least, especially when this contract goes live for the first month for sure. And then of course you've got the Smoothman, which is available from the 25th of February to the 25th of March, so you've got a month there to be able to complete this one. It's the same sort of story, where you're getting XP, you're winning battle, placing in top 8, etc., and all of this sort of stuff is the exact same. And you're seeing that it's medium or tank destroyers between tier 3 and 10, and you keep on going and going and going, and the XP just increases by like double every single time, and so you're going to have to grind out about 200,000 XP for this one, something like that. I haven't done the calculation, so it's just a broad thing. But then you get the Smoothman, which is okay in terms of the tank performance. But yeah, it's just basically the exact same. And then you've got the Chisel, which is from the 25th of February till the 9th of September. So a very long one, this one. This is like a 6-monther nearly. And so, yeah, you've got similar sort of story, the exact same contracts. And as you go through, they're all just your standard boring, just play the game contract requirements, which I find extremely boring. And I was hoping that over time that they'd try and experiment a bit more with some of these challenges to make them more rewarding, more incentivizing to, aim for fuel tanks and stuff like that to set people on fire, or loading HE to be able to de-track opponents and stuff like that. But it seems like they've just gone completely through the motions again with these contracts, and I feel like it's a missed opportunity. But this one is going to take you an absolute butt ton of time, because you're going to need like 1.5 million XP, 1.6. You're probably needing like 1.67 million XP, which is like 1,500 games, 1,600 games for the average player. Maybe I'm even overshooting that, so it could be nearer the 2,000 game mark for standard players playing the game, which is a butt ton of games. And yeah, if you consider like, I don't know, even if you were to say 10 games per hour, you're still taking like a absolute metric ton of time to be able to complete this operation. It's like nearly 200, 300 hours or something in order for you to actually complete this in its entirety, which is ridiculous. So yeah, getting this one done for players is going to be a pain. But yeah, hopefully that at least gives you an indication of what's coming. And of course you do get silver and stuff like that from completing them, so they are worth adding on. But in my opinion, just plop one on and play the game as you normally would. I don't really ever have to focus on doing any of this stuff. It just gets auto-completed when I play the game, which is a bit counterintuitive considering that these are supposed to be interesting content additions that kind of give you something to do when you're in that downtime between seasons after you complete the season pass. You're not even having to focus on this additional content, and I wouldn't even call it content really. It's just, here you go, play the game and you'll get a reward. Pretty darn boring to me, and yeah, not really incentivizing my gameplay or trying to change up the gameplay and make it a bit more interesting. So that's something I would like to see, and maybe just a rehaul of the whole contract system that they have in the game would be a very valuable thing to keep it more engaging, and even just setting, you know, contracts that are not for tanks themselves, just like a contract to be able to get a specific skin that people grind towards and can go ahead and, you know, even if they sell the skin or whatever, I would like to personally see non-sellable skins that are available as part of contracts, like a limited time event, because it keeps people wanting to play, and it doesn't impact the game. You're not having to, you know, spend as much time developing a new tank to then release for free. So stuff like that I think is really valuable to games, providing the best amount of content that is actual content rather than just rinse and repeat as usual. Yeah, and considering that they track all of the statistics of various different things in the game anyway, I feel like they could still track all of the additional things like how many tanks you set on fire or whatever, because they have the Arsonist medal which tracks how many people you've set on fire anyway. So why not just add that in as a special tank contract available for a year or something like that. And, you know, if you set 150 people on fire during that year, you get a skin that is just flames or something like that. You know, nothing too major or dramatic, but yeah, I feel like that would be kind of cool to have in the game. Either way, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like it, and of course subscribe down below if you want to see more World of Tanks console content. And I do appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.